Elder Pate chose that week of all weeks to announce that the Harvest Festival would move to the chapel calendar this year, and that the old Telling-Rites of the hives were, in his words, a lovely custom we might gently retire before the younger folk feel obligated to keep pretending. He did not say this to be cruel. That was almost the worst part. I want to be fair to Patty, because it would be easy not to be. He has buried more of this village than anyone alive, has sat with more grieving families than the rest of us combined, and I think somewhere in the last decade he decided that the kindest thing he could do for Hallamere was to slowly, gently unwind its stranger habits before the wider world found them first and made us a curiosity instead of a community. He is not wrong that the world is changing around us. He is only wrong about what the telling actually is. I stood up in the square and said the telling wasn't pretend, that I had heard the hum myself 4 nights running, and half the village looked at me with the kind, worried look they save for the odd Marrow girl talking to her bees again. An older woman near the front, Cade's widow, actually reached over and patted my arm the way you'd comfort someone at a graveside, which was somehow worse than if she'd laughed outright. Pate said gently, "That grief does strange things to a mind, and grandmother's age was nothing to be ashamed of, and I understood then that being right and being believed were 2 very different fights, and that I had just lost the second one in front of most of the village I'd grown up in. It was old Sarah Ames who said the thing that actually landed, not unkindly, in that way village elders have of saying the cruelest thing in the gentlest voice. Your grandmother buried her own mother believing the bees, love." Maybe it's time somebody in your family stopped. A few people laughed, not cruelly, just the small nervous laugh of people who don't know where else to put their discomfort. I didn't have an answer for that one. It's the one that stayed with me since. I left before the meeting properly ended, which is not a thing I do, and walked faster than I needed to toward the one place in Hallamere where nobody expects me to explain myself. I was furious in the specific, useless way you're furious when the thing you're maddest about is that you can't prove you're right, only that you're certain. Corwin found me after, sitting on the low wall behind the chapel where I go when I want to be furious in private. He didn't offer comfort right away, which I liked him for. He just sat down at a careful distance and said, "For what it's worth, I believe you. I don't know what I'm believing exactly, but I believe you heard something." We talked longer than either of us meant to. He asked what the hum sounded like, and I tried 3 different ways to describe a sound that isn't really a sound, more a pressure, a held breath under the ordinary song, and he listened the way he always listens, like the answer was worth the trouble of asking. At one point he asked whether it frightened me, and I said honestly that it didn't. Not the sound itself. What frightened me was not knowing whose grief it was carrying, and being afraid to find out it was his. Something crossed his face when I said that last part, quick enough that I almost missed it. Not surprise exactly, recognition, like I'd gotten closer to something true than I knew. He didn't say anything about it. He just went quieter for a moment, looking at his own hands the way he does when he's deciding how much of something to let show. "Do you ever wonder," he said, looking at his own hands, "whether some things are worth telling the truth about, even when the truth doesn't fix anything?" I said I didn't understand the question. "Neither do I, some days," he said, and something in his face went somewhere old and closed, somewhere I couldn't follow no matter how gently I tried. I asked as carefully as I know how to ask anything, whether this was about wherever east of here actually was. He didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer. "It's about a lot of things," he said finally. "Most of them boring, like I said." "You keep saying boring," I said, "for something you clearly can't stop thinking about." He almost smiled at that, the real kind, the kind that reaches his eyes for exactly a second before he remembers to guard it again. "Corwin," I said his name careful, like it might startle something. "Where are you actually from?" He looked at me a long moment, and I watched him decide something, watched the decision move across his face like weather, and then he smiled. And the smile was warm and real and completely a wall. "A village smaller than this one, and twice as boring," he said. "You're not missing anything by not knowing its name." I want to be honest about something here, because I've been unfair to myself in the telling of it before now. I could have pushed harder. I could have said his name again, sharper, and made him choose between answering me honestly and lying to my face outright instead of sideways. I didn't. Some part of me was afraid that if I forced the truth out of him before he was ready to give it, I would get an answer I couldn't come back from, and I was not yet willing to trade the good, easy version of him I had for whatever the honest version might turn out to be. I laughed because he wanted me to, and he relaxed because I did, and underneath all of it I noted plainly, the way you note a stitch coming loose, he had almost told me something true, and then he had not. I have gotten good this past week at noticing exactly the shape of the things Corwin doesn't say. It is not a skill I wanted. We walked back toward the village as the light went gold, and for a while neither of us said anything, and it wasn't uncomfortable, which frightened me more than an awkward silence would have. I have never once in my life sat quietly with a person and felt this settled. I did not know yet whether that feeling belonged to me or to whatever the hive was still humming about him. I found myself hoping, treacherously, that it didn't matter which. Walking beside him, I found myself thinking, oddly, of the first telling I ever gave alone, the year I turned 16, and my grandmother finally trusted my voice enough to let me tell the hive about a cousin's wedding without her standing over my shoulder. I remember how strange it felt to speak formally to an audience of insects, and how much stranger it felt when the hum shifted afterward, gentle and approving, like it had actually heard me. I hadn't thought about that day in years. I don't know why it surfaced then, walking next to a man I still didn't fully trust, except that some part of me was already rehearsing, without meaning to, what I would eventually have to tell the hive about him. At one point, he reached over without seeming to think about it and pulled a stray bit of orchard leaf out of my hair, and neither of us made anything of it, and both of us noticed. We didn't talk about the hum again that whole walk. I think we'd both decided, without saying so, to give ourselves one evening off from being afraid of what we didn't understand yet. At the gate he took my hand. Just that, just my hand for a moment, his thumb over my knuckles like he was memorizing them, and he said, "Quiet, whatever you hear in that hive, Linnet. I need you to know I'm not lying to hurt you." I asked him what he was lying about, then if not to hurt me. He let go of my hand gently. "I'm not ready to say," he said, "but I will be. I promise you that." And behind us, faint on the evening air, carried from my grandmother's garden, the second voice hummed on, patient as ever, like it had heard the promise too, and was simply waiting to see if he'd keep it. Episode 4. Tomorrow.